Good morning. 안녕하세요. My name is Ryan Hass, and I am the Michael Armacost Chair in Foreign Policy Studies at the Brookings Institution. I previously served as a Foreign Service Officer, including in U.S. Embassy Seoul, as well as the China Director at the National Security Council of the White House. I'm familiar with the long history and influential role that the Korean International Trade Association plays, and so it's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to speak with you today. I have been invited to offer a perspective on the future direction of U.S.-China relations from the United States perspective. I will briefly describe how the United States and China have arrived at their current moment, offer a perspective on where the relationship stands now, and then try to offer a few thoughts on where I see the relationship headed going forward. And in terms of context, I think it's important for us to recall the path that the U.S.-China relationship has traveled for the past year to the present. When President Biden entered office in January 2021, the United States-China relationship was basically dysfunctional. There were no productive channels of communication between both countries. There was no real cooperation. Neither country had a good mechanism in place to deal with differences when they emerged. The most dominant aspect of the relationship in January 2021 was confrontation through public condemnation in both directions. Both sides blamed the other for the deterioration in the relationship, and both sides saw the other as hostile to their own goals. This was the situation that President Biden inherited. When they entered office, the Biden administration team accepted the Trump administration's view that the United States had limited ability to influence China's domestic decisions, and that there was little to be gained by trying to reconstruct an elaborate diplomatic architecture for dialogues. But they felt that the Trump administration had pursued an impulse-driven, go-it-alone strategy for dealing with China, when what was needed was a more integrated and coordinated approach with allies and partners. They also felt it was necessary to restore some channels of communication between Washington and Beijing. So upon entering office, I think the Biden administration set out to adjust the manner by which the United States would approach the China challenge. At the outset, they reached a few fundamental judgments. The first was that they jettisoned rhetoric about containing China or seeking to decouple the United States economy from China's economy, or seeking to undermine the Chinese Communist Party's grip on power. Instead, they began talking about creating a favorable balance of power in Asia and on working to influence the environment in which China would rise. The early focus of the Biden administration's diplomatic efforts was on fortifying and developing the Quad relationship between the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. The first visits to the White House were very deliberately from key Asian partners, including Prime Minister Suga and President Moon. And the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom launched what is now known as the AUKUS agreement to align their efforts, including over development of nuclear-powered submarines. Secondly, they judged that Asia would be the center of gravity in the international system for the rest of this century, and that whoever was strongest in Asia would be strongest on the world stage. I think this thinking informed the Biden administration's approach to questions in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. It informed their efforts to try to cool things down with Russia so that the United States could concentrate more of its resources and its attention on developments in Asia. Third, the Biden administration decided early on that much of the struggle between the United States and China would occur in the technological domain. So they looked for ways to deepen their investments at home in innovation, and also to find ways to pool resources with allies and partners, including in South Korea, to try to accelerate development of cutting-edge technologies to strengthen supply chain resilience so that the United States and its partners would have an edge in this long-term competition. Their real emphasis was not as much on trying to slow China down as it was on trying to speed up the pace of innovation in the United States and with its partners. Fourth, I think the Biden administration recognized that America's investments in strengthening itself at home would be their most impactful way of strengthening their competitive position for dealing with the long-term China challenge. They recognize that no country can be stronger on the world stage than it is at home, and that there were pressing urgent crises that they would have to deal with, including the COVID crisis, issues around social justice, climate, economic inequality, and other issues. Fifth, I think that the Biden administration was very committed at the outset to trying to disabuse a perception that America is in terminal decline and China is on an inexorable rise. This was the Chinese propaganda narrative. From Beijing's perspective, they wanted to try to sell an idea that time and momentum are on China's side, that the East is rising and the West is declining. But that didn't sit well with many in the Biden administration. I think they've been looking for ways to try to show that the United States is not enfeebled, but rather is confident and it's capable of pushing back on China's actions at home and its assertiveness abroad. So they've been looking for opportunities to strengthen America's diplomatic, economic, and military presence, particularly in Asia, as a bulwark against any perception that China is on the march and America is in retreat. And in fairness, I have to say that the diplomatic and military aspects have certainly run faster than the economic aspects. The Biden administration is still struggling to develop a coherent and affirmative economic and trade agenda in Asia. Six, to the extent that direct diplomacy with China figures into the picture, I think it's to manage the US-China relationship and prevent tensions in the relationship from overheating. The Biden administration seems to be somewhat skeptical of how much cooperation is possible between the United States and China these days. They're very committed to opposing issue linkages, this idea that the United States must offer concessions in certain areas in order to attract cooperation in others. They're also opposed to being drawn into endless dialogues that prioritize process over progress. They see direct diplomacy more so as a pressure release valve to control the level of heat that exists in the relationship than it is to try to really drive an agenda forward. So I think these are some of the judgments that informed the Biden administration's early approach to China in this first year in office. So how's it working? Following the virtual meeting between President Biden and President Xi on November 15th, I think the United States and China both appear to be settling into a zone of mutually tolerable friction in the relationship, which is where I think that they will be for much of the next year. This is because neither side really needs or wants a lot from the other. Neither side has many expectations that the other will moderate its approach on issues of concern in the foreseeable future. I think that both Washington and Beijing assume that domestic factors will be the key driver for both leaders in the coming year. Many in Washington assume that China's top leaders will not want to appear weak towards the United States before their party Congress next fall. Just as I often hear from friends in Beijing that they don't expect that President Biden will moderate America's approach toward China before the midterm elections in the United States next fall, because they will not want to attract criticism for going soft on China. At the same time, I don't think that either leader sees profit in further escalating tensions in the US-China relationship beyond current levels. And both leaders have committed to remain personally involved in managing the relationship to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. So in essence, what I see is regular leader level involvement in managing this relationship will put a bit of a floor underneath the relationship to prevent it from continuing to fall. At the same time, domestic politics in both countries will put a bit of a ceiling on the relationship to limit how much room there is for growth in the relationship over the next year. And that's where I think the relationship will travel, between this floor and the ceiling over the next year. And I think that this focus on maintaining levels of friction within tolerable bounds will work fine for the Biden administration. Their top priority for the coming year is to replenish America's sources of strength and its power at home, its tight bonds with its allies, and its connectivity with other democratic governments around the world. I expect that the Biden administration would prefer for the United States-China relationship not to be seen as an urgent or immediate crisis requiring dramatic action, because that could that could invite very difficult sources of tension, but it could also distract from their more immediate domestic priorities. Rather, I think the Biden administration would prefer for the competition between the United States and China to be seen as long-term, a long-term competitive coexistence where both sides are working to demonstrate that their government system is best able to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Over the long term, I see two broader trends that I think will inform the trajectory of the US-China relationship. And I think these two trends are in a bit of tension with each other. The first trend is that both the United States and China are working to strengthen their relative positions for competing against the other. The United States is investing in its domestic dynamism, its relationships with allies. It's trying to galvanize international efforts to tackle global challenges because this creates global prestige for the United States and also makes the world a better place. I think China is trying to create more favorable terms for its ability to manage its relationship with the United States. It's encouraging the United States financial sector to become more vocal and calling for stabilization of ties. It's trying to raise public awareness in the United States of the risks of a deterioration in relations. And abroad, I think that China is working to try to offset some of the setbacks in their relationships with countries in the developed world by really working to invest in strengthening their influence in Africa, in the Middle East, in Central Asia, Latin America, Oceania, and in parts of Europe. So this is the first trend, both sides girding themselves for the long-term competition with the other. At the same time, there's another trend. The second trend is that global challenges are becoming more impactful and are creating growing demand from the rest of the world for the United States and China to align their unique capabilities in service of public goods. Whether it's on climate issues, public health, spurring global economic growth, energy security, sustainable development, the world is looking to the United States and China to deliver more than great power competition with each other. The world is looking for both of these major powers to support efforts to find solutions to global challenges. And the more that the United States and China are pushed by other powers to focus on global challenges, the more possible it might become for both of them to look above their own differences to see the broader trends that are affecting the rest of the world. Ultimately, I expect that US-China competition will be a longstanding feature of the international system. Both countries have different governance and economic models. Both countries have ambitions regionally and globally that are in tension with each other. In this long-term competition, prestige will be derived from performance. Whichever country demonstrates greatest capacity to improve the lives of their citizens and the lives of others around the world will benefit from the pull of power. Over time, I expect that the United States-China competition will play out more meaningfully in the economic, technological, diplomatic, and social governance realms than it will in the military domain. And as this competition unfolds, it should open up space over time for Korea to pursue its interests as it defines them. It will give Seoul more strategic space to lean toward the United States on some issues, even as it tilts towards China on occasion on others. Ultimately, my sense is that the less sharp the confrontation between the United States and China, the less pressure there will be on Seoul to align all of their actions with one power or the other. I hope these observations on the direction of US-China relations help support your own thinking. But above all, thank you to the Korean International Trade Association for including me in today's proceedings. Goodbye.